So today we're going to be talking about bridging user research to information architecture. We are going to kind of talk about it from how we kind of see strategy. My role at Atten is I'm a senior digital strategist. So you'll get a pretty good sense today of what that means and how we really define and kind of approach strategy. Um, as Jenna mentioned, we largely kind of break down our services at Atten into strategy, design, and development. So a lot of what we are going to be talking about today is how we really kind of take the strategy work that we do, whether it's a part of a full redesign or if we kind of take some of these elements and some of these processes that we're going to go through and start to kind of create really actionable deliverables and materials that allow our clients and our design and development teams to really move forward with the findings and kind of research that we do with users and with stakeholders. So just to kind of frame our strategy process, we really see this through the lens of kind of a few core questions that we're looking to answer through a variety of different processes and tools. So we really start by understanding where you are now as an organization, both in terms of your website, the content, where you're growing, where your organization or different programs have outgrown the site, why you're doing this project. So making sure that we have a clear understanding of the mission of the organization or institution and can really make sure that the work that we're doing supports kind of the high level and overarching goals of your organization, and that it's not just seen as kind of a side project, but that the website is really a tool to support your kind of overall mission. A lot of what we're going to be talking about is really identifying who the website is for, both in terms of the internal audiences, but especially the external audiences, and making sure that we really understand who you are looking to connect with. We're going to be looking at what they need and what the different kind of goals and tasks, information that people are looking for. And then we start to think about how do we connect your users to your goals? And that's where the information architecture really comes in. So just to clarify this a little bit more, our strategy process really breaks down into two overall kind of phases. The first being our research phase. So this is where we're going through a variety of processes, including surveys, both internal and external, workshops, either again, internal or external or virtual, as you're seeing in kind of that bottom right hand corner, or in person, as you kind of see in the upper right. We go through interviews and really making sure that we're kind of talking to different perspectives, talking to different types of departments or roles within the organization, reviewing the analytics and content in terms of both kind of what is the most trafficked parts of your site, how are the different kind of elements, page types templated in order to kind of format and create the structures for your site. And we really take all of that and start to package it into a few core deliverables. So that includes things like goals and key performance indicators, audience categorization, really understanding how your audiences break down both at a macro level and then different distinct, what we call psychographic needs, which we'll get a little bit more into later, personas and user journeys, and making sure that we capture kind of the very human side of how people look to navigate through your site. A project narrative to really give ourselves kind of a high level overview of what the project is looking to accomplish and why you came to us. And then really packaging that all into discovery report and having really clear documentation from all of the processes, all of the deliverables, and really giving you a concrete kind of report and piece of documentation to share out kind of and clarify what work is going on. From there, we move into our information architecture. So this is really where, for us, our clients get to sit back and relax a little more. It's more so us kind of preparing deliverables and having review sessions. So we'll be looking at the sitemap and how pages are organized and categorized around the site, the menu navigation and how users will navigate to those different kind of parts of the site and different pages. Sometimes those are the same. Sometimes there are some different kind of evolutions there that happen. Wireframes, as you're seeing in kind of the upper right hand corner, really kind of starting to break down how we plan for content to be kind of both told in a narrative form and in terms of the different components that are kind of going to exist on key landing pages and different templates. And then what we call a content model, which really starts to document not only the kind of content types in Drupal terms, but in kind of all of the different CMSs that we work with, how we're really going to start to break down all of the user research, all of the findings, and create really clear kind of component by component, paragraph by paragraph type, how we really start to structure that into the templates that you'll be using to author your site. So how do we go from surveys, workshops, goals, personas, and stories into a clear architectural framework for your site? In a little bit, we'll go through how we approach this at Atten, and we're going to share a few examples of our tools and methodologies that we use. But first, let's really clarify why this is so important to do and where it can really create a huge gap in many websites. So starting with really connecting users to their needs, this is how we make sure that we're ensuring your audiences can find what they need as efficiently as possible. So really kind of achieving some of those core goals of the site, ensuring users are able to easily reach key impact driving content. So whether that's filling out a form or registering for an event, that kind of pathway is very simple and intuitive for users, that we're avoiding basing your website's organization solely on an org chart. We find that that's a very common kind of comfort zone that people default to. And we really want to make sure that the way that we organize information and content across the site aligns with external expectations, so that we're really kind of vetting any kind of internal biases or assumptions and making sure that we're really kind of meeting users where they are and what they expect to find. In addition, we see this as a way to make the most of stakeholder engagement. So ensuring that any kind of resources in terms of time or outreach that is put towards engaging external audiences or internal departments, that we really have a clear, actionable path in terms of the context of the website, and how the work that it goes into that will inform the work that you do. We also see this as potentially having the ability to avoid survey fatigue, in that, again, kind of missing that lack of clear direction from any kind of engagement or surveys that are distributed internally, but that, again, there is that clear link to future work, and that the users can really see their input and see their participation as having a clear outcome in the work that you do and how you represent yourself externally. This really does provide a great way to kind of have clear decision-making parameters. So this kind of documentation includes shared priorities across internal and external groups, creating a framework to hold decisions to down the line. So this has the potential to mitigate some of those individual biases that can happen when providing feedback on designs and the organization of the site menus, but really ensuring that groups are all bought into this shared vision that aligns with user needs, and that they're really, again, refocusing on how do we get users to what they're looking for. So we're going to be looking at providing clear connections between foundational research and planned frameworks. And in terms of frameworks, we really mean those site structures like the menus, the wireframes, and really making sure that in all of that, we can have those decisions be traced back when needed, and can really kind of understand what those underlying decision-making values, goals are that really inform the deliverables and materials you see down the line. And this really does allow you to capture your brand and represent your brand at a very high level. So this is where we make sure that users can get a bird's eye view of your organization and brand when skimming the menus and or key landing pages of your site. This is often where users will get kind of a sense for what it is that you do, how you describe yourself, how you talk to them. And it establishes a framework for evolving the way you communicate your work over time. So as websites inevitably grow and evolve, that you really understand kind of what are those underlying foundations and frameworks that can provide some ability to kind of flex and grow in the future. So let's start by diving into how we generally approach the strategy process for different types of organizations and institutions that we work with, in order to understand how we approach different types of website projects. It's helpful to consider that at its core, we really consider your website as a way to have a conversation with your audiences and build your relationship with them. So it's a way to have a personal connection. And while some conversations lean towards users asking for a specific need, this might be something like paying a bill, registering for an event, checking the status of something, finding a piece of information that they're looking for. These tend to be a little bit more interactive in terms of users seeking out a piece of content, but are less often focused on kind of the organization telling their story. So we'll go a little bit more into that as well. But other sites are more driven by what the organization wants to tell their audiences about their work and their impact. So this might be something where the organization wants to showcase where you do work, or some of the statistics around the impact that you have and communicate that to outside audiences. Often we find this is aligned with fundraising or different types of kind of high-level bird's eye view websites that kind of capture the organization's story, so are less focused on those interactions and getting users to these pieces of information they might be seeking, but is more focused on breaking down the story that your organization has to say. So in terms of how we really kind of adjust our research and really kind of use our different tools and resources and processes internally based on these different types of approaches, our user-driven website research is really focused on identifying what audiences need and what is important. So really making sure that we have clear priorities, both internally and externally, that for complex user needs, we are focused on the steps of their journey. So for example, if it's a really complicated curriculum that somebody wants to sign up for or something, really breaking down what the steps of that journey are, both on and off the site. For complex content to sift through, but is maybe not as complicated, like finding a piece of information, we really focus the research on expectations for finding content and ensuring that those external expectations align with internal ones. And this really aims to leverage data as much as possible to verify those decisions. So we're often using user analytics, survey feedback. It can be really beneficial to look at things like customer service requests or where you're getting a lot of calls from users that are really kind of common, unclear questions that people have. And we're really making sure that the way that you organize content aligns with how real users perceive the organization and use of language. So often, again, this is where we go back to making sure that we're not recreating an org chart, but are really ensuring that we can kind of connect users in the way they expect to find information. For more narrative-driven website research, we focus this more on identifying what is important to communicate about the organization. So we focus on talking to diverse perspectives across the organization through tools like interviews or surveys, and we're really looking to align priorities and website drivers, often with a core team. So this aims to leverage qualitative input, so those kind of conversational narrative aspects, and really leverage kind of storytelling as much as possible to align decisions. So again, we're more focused on stakeholder engagement, having conversations with key individuals or perspectives who can speak to the vision of the work being done, whether that's key leadership roles or individuals who might be more on the ground and can speak to some of those kind of perspectives of different programs or initiatives that are going on. We're really just looking to kind of organize and align on communicating a message and creating the framework to tell that story. So we're thinking about what we call narrative nodes, which are kind of what you could imagine are the chapters of your organization's story, and really understanding how you plan to build content to support that message. So often, just to clarify, we don't see these as really concrete, separated projects. There's often elements of each that get pulled in, but we do see that there is a fairly broad spectrum of how we might approach our work depending on the type of organization and the type of work and the type of websites. All websites are incredibly different. So we'd love to start by diving into a case study of how we approach a very user-driven website. So we're going to be reviewing our strategy process for an in-progress project, the Tampa International Airport's website, or TPA, as you might hear me reference. So given the scale of the user base for this site, we knew we needed to engage with a lot of perspectives. So starting with our surveys, we sent both internally and externally via their embedding directly in the site and having a pop-up that encouraged users to partake in a 2-minute survey. We distributed our survey through the newsletter and ended up also getting a total of around 1,200 participants there, primarily in the passenger kind of user base, as you would imagine for an airport. And we also heard from quite a range of internal departments as well. So we talked to a variety of departments, from communications to legal, maintenance, parking, the real estate of kind of involved bringing new airlines to an airport, and really getting a sense for common questions, some of the pathways that users are going down. And then from there, we started to build our quantitative data set through looking in the analytics of the site. In terms of kind of the total visitors, we're looking at about 2.5 million users per year. This is such a small portion of the user base for the airport as a whole. I want to say it's like 5% or so or less. So it really was giving us a sense for of all the users who are coming to the airport, what is the proportion of people who are coming to the website? What is bringing them to the site if they do? As many of us who travel and fly, you would recognize that a lot of the times you're looking at an airport website if you're looking for a restaurant or have a specific question, but we really wanted to understand what are those specific instances that bring people to the site. So we were able to use both Google Analytics, and this is a client that worked early on with a tool called Microsoft Clarity, which gives us a wonderful kind of heat mapping tool. It's something I really recommend to use and integrate with your Google Analytics. It can really benefit in terms of identifying which parts of key pages individuals interact with, how far they scroll into page, what percentage of users scroll into the page. So this really gave us a clear picture of how users interact with content across the site. So from there, we knew we wanted to hear directly from stakeholders and passengers to review key scenarios and understand where they had the greatest pain points and opportunities to improve their experience. So we got the chance to talk to about 20 different users who we recruited through our surveys, talking to passengers, getting a sense for where some of these experiences are really delightful, where they really would have struggles, where there are some of these very human experiences that you just cannot get through analytics or through a survey. And then building that with our stakeholders and really understanding what the different perspectives and priorities are across the departments in the airport. So through these engagements and work sessions with the client's project steering committee, we began to build a clear understanding of the breadth of audience types we would need to evaluate the needs of. So again, this is where we go back to kind of our audience categorization and understanding that while the airport guests, as they call them, or the passengers, really are the primary audience, there's still some kind of distinct needs within those. So things like senior disabled travelers are a distinct audience within our documentation, given that they have a distinct need and kind of pathway that they need to take through the site, and we need to consider as we build our site menus. But also thinking about groups like our business partners, the suppliers, concessionaires, airlines who are paying rent and kind of are a tenant of the airport, the community, the local organizations that partner with Tampa Airport. I think this is the first airport I've ever heard of that routinely has events. They have 5Ks, they have concerts. It is known as Tampa's Living Room. And really speaking to that audience was a distinct need that we wanted to make sure got captured in terms of how we represent the organization. And then, of course, kind of the staff themselves and everybody, kind of all the internal perspectives that have their own distinct priorities. So in order to pull together the conversations that we are having with real individuals, the priorities established across departments, user survey data, analytics data, we typically, for projects of this type, use a custom aggregated scoring methodology that standardizes how we quantify research findings and compare data across groups. So we use a weighted point system in this case, which includes website analytics having kind of a point per 10,000 page views in the past 10, 12 months, which proportion of users in our survey ranked a certain use case or need within the website as a high priority. Some of the voting that we did in person, where we were able to have more direct connections with individuals, and we're speaking directly with them in workshops, steering committee sessions, and really making sure that we kind of elevate how we represent that kind of input in our feedback. So these places where we don't have as much of that loss in translation, where you might have on a survey where we might not know how somebody interpreted a question, but in a workshop, we really are there having the conversation with somebody and understanding how they prioritize certain parts of the website. So this is really where having that kind of moderated research as opposed to unmoderated research like surveys and analytics can really give ourselves kind of an ability to compare different data sets and build on the kind of quantitative data that we have. So this methodology results in a clear analysis for us of which topics are most important across the greatest range of groups and research engagements. This allows us to clearly articulate which topics are most critical to elevate in the site menu navigation and calls to action, clear buttons across the site, and really where it is less critical to find information throughout a user's experience. So for example, we found that the intuitive layout of the airport resulted in minimal need for content that supported the actual navigation or a lot of the on-site experience of the airport itself. So a lot of the times users were using in-person signage for things like finding security or figuring out which shuttle to take. That was not as critical for the site. However, navigating to and from the airport was both something that stood out to our users. They were passionate about how they were able to save money through booking ahead, but that it also really benefited and was leveraged by our stakeholder team, and seeing that that pre-booking parking is one of their primary revenue drivers as an airport. So really making sure that we're able to aggregate the input that we were having from users with the input that we were having from internal stakeholders was really important for this element, and making sure that we gave that the kind of representation on the site in terms of the menus and content that it needed. So to provide a more human insight into the data that informs our site and capture the feedback we hear from research participants, we typically use audience profiles to demonstrate the experiences that users will go through both on and off the site. So for example, hearing from individuals about the vulnerability of leaving your disabled parents with a staff member before going to park your car with your toddler, those are kinds of information and points of clarity that we just cannot get from a survey or from analytics. So this is something where we're really looking to kind of capture some of the feedback, some of the qualitative information that we're getting, and then start to frame that into key opportunities within their experience. So these are direct kind of opportunities that have been taken from our user workshops and working through people, what the steps of their journey are, where they're having questions, where they're having points of clarification that are needed, and what the biggest opportunities are to align that again with our internal priorities for the airport. So for each audience, like the local small business owner, we establish key questions they might have on the site based on our conversations that we have with real users and stakeholders. So these are questions that were kind of brought up in our workshops, things like, how can I get my product sold at the airport? Or what is the process for becoming a supplier? And again, we really make sure that sometimes this is reviewing what questions are frequently called in about, or how the website can alleviate some of those common misconceptions users might have, like that the procurement process is not often even for this user, but making sure that we understand where those common pain points are, where we want to really kind of direct users and split some of their paths. And we're really going to kind of see how that started to kind of play out in our site's information architecture. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to kind of some of our Figma documentation that we had for this project. So starting with our sitemap and menus, one of the biggest takeaways that we had from the process was to really split kind of our passenger menu from the business menu and start to think about what are the journeys that individuals are going through, again, kind of taking that aggregated data, this kind of scoring methodology, and using that to kind of simplify what are the options that we're presenting to users, particularly in a very mobile format, and making it really easy for people to find information as they're navigating to and from the airport, that they can, and really kind of as they're quickly navigating through the airport, that they can find information like where to eat, drink, and shop, or information about their flight status. But that if they are a business owner, that they are able to quickly navigate to a separate menu within our design and easily get into information about working with the airport, what those opportunities are, what kind of different career paths are open to them. And so from there, we work through our wireframes and really start to understand and break down what are the different components and elements of this kind of site and the different pages on the sitemap that we've determined. So for example, for this site, we were really looking at how can we make sure that ordering ahead on food, again, a key revenue driver, is really easy for users to browse through, that we are clearly able to kind of filter and provide some of those tools that users were asking for, and that internal groups are looking to leverage, like time, kind of hours of operation that relate to flight information and flight data, and really making sure that we're kind of incorporating both the user feedback with kind of those internal, particularly revenue driving pieces of feedback from our stakeholders. And then we're looking at how do we kind of support some of these different pages that we're proposing in terms of looking at that page and how we can make sure that it's really easy to navigate to information about this tenant. So for Starbucks, for example, and making sure that we can really showcase that it's very easy to browse and incorporate information that complements the in-person experience and the in-person signage, and that we're really elevating that, as well as, again, some of their kind of revenue driving tools on the site. From there, we start to break down kind of all the different fields that we review into, again, what we call a content model. So really looking at both kind of the templated content that is very clearly kind of laid out and is fixed in place on the page. So things like a point of contact and always having a designated location on the page for that. But where we're looking at some of the more flexible content for different types of page templates that might give more flexibility to users. So again, thinking of that Starbucks profile, if there is an interest in having some kind of showcase carousel of different types of imagery of their menu or things like that, that we provide the flexibility, but that at the baseline, it's not necessary and does supplement and kind of support our overall kind of site experience that we just looked at. So looking at how this starts to kind of flex into a more narrative-driven research approach, for this, we are starting with kind of a goals prioritization. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of the processes and tools and kind of questions that we would definitely kind of recommend that you ask yourselves if you're going through this process. And at the beginning of this, we typically start by clarifying and prioritizing what is most important to accomplish as a result of the work. So we might ask questions like, what is nice to have versus a critical element of the project? What drives funding or growth for your organization? Where have you most outgrown your current web presence? Are there any interactions that we can track and measure success through your analytics? And so we might use tools like dot voting, which you'll see kind of, hopefully you can see my cursor now. And we are using that to facilitate a voting session to establish relative priorities across the scope of the project. And from there, we really begin to refine how we document the project's direction, again, through Figma tools and through kind of clear documentation at the end of the project, as you're seeing in the bottom right. And then depending on how concisely an organization can articulate their purpose to us, we might support in developing a mission statement. We typically utilize what's called a verb target outcome model, which is where we help an organization identify and prioritize what it is they do, who it is for, and what they aim to achieve through their work. So we think about kind of what verbs are most compelling to communicate that, who you're looking to have an impact on, whether as a group or as multiple groups, and what do you see as the result of that impact? Why do you do what you do? So again, we have kind of flexible tools that we typically use in Figma workshops with kind of core teams and steering committees, and really start to kind of both brainstorm and then prioritize. How do we kind of break down the story? What is most important to communicate about how the work that you do and how you simplify your story to the outside world? So once we start to understand like the meat and potatoes of what our clients do and what's important to the project, we begin to refine what values and personality drivers will drive how the site communicates to audiences. This will give the team a core set of qualities to hold decisions to and can really drive everything from key messages to main menu items to what content decides to be featured as we tell the story. So again, you might be asking questions like, are there qualities we would like to reinforce or move away from or grow into? Are there any key drivers we feel capture a lot of what we do and could summarize other elements of our work? What values are most important to communicate to audience or really reflect and can be shared by audiences? So again, kind of starting in kind of the center where my mouse is, we typically think about, again, kind of brainstorming and prioritizing, typically kind of working it through Figma and dragging cards around to really facilitate the conversation. We're thinking about kind of relative brand qualities, and again, then documenting it. So as we go through, we can really think about, okay, does this project really feel approachable? Does this menu language feel like it's something that we can relate to? And from there, we typically capture this research and refine it with clients into what we call messaging pillars, or the overall messages that are important to communicate about your organization. So these pillars allow us to organize the narrative feedback into clear and concise statements which other ideas and content can fall under to support. These pillars will often correlate to key landing pages or the overall organization of the menu of the site, but are really a tool for providing structure to make complex work and storytelling more digestible. So again, we're often asking questions like, what are the key points a user should understand about your organization? What kinds of content do you have to support these ideas in terms of the visual and types of information that might be supplementing the point that you want to be making? And what can be consolidated, deprioritized, or otherwise simplified? So a lot of what we're looking to do with this is to make sure that we are not kind of having duplicative work across the site or content, but we're really simplifying and making sure that there is kind of a core point of truth that, if necessary, we can direct to from other points in the site and simplify the menu for external users. So for narrative-driven site, there are often fewer numbers of pages with more in-depth information and a need to break down the content that's within them. So for this reason, we typically utilize a more content-driven sitemap to articulate what topics will be covered within key landing pages and how those will relate to the site menus. So this is where we're thinking about what does a user, again, need to see at a site-wide level, again, thinking about that very skimmable type of experience. Where should key topics be organized across the site? And where should we consolidate and again expand how we articulate this topic? So we're really thinking about how do we kind of simplify the sitemap and make sure that it's something that people can get and understand your story at a very concise level and make sure that it's clear to all audiences. So we typically end with our wireframes, again, where we're breaking down kind of the key narrative elements of your site, thinking of what are the high level chapters, and then what are those kind of sections within them that we want to make sure get captured. And how do we tell that story? So how are we supporting that with imagery, video, media, what have you, and really making sure that this is very clear for users in terms of what your story is and how you support it. So we're thinking about what are those key narrative points that we want to make sure users can understand if they're skimming the page, what content can visually support that message, and where are there gaps in your current toolkit that you need to support their story. So that might mean that you need to pull together key statistics, or you realize that it's really important to have a compelling video that interviews some of your stakeholders or users to tell the story in a more personal way. So this is where we really start to think about what are those elements of the site that we want to make sure are captured and that we're designing as we move forward. So just to kind of end on a few closing remarks, just one, again, really want to clarify that there are no hard lines between these. These processes are rarely so contrasting in their needs and approach. We are often using a variety of services for a project depending on the organization's dynamics, stakeholder involvement, key user needs, and more. And if you have any strategy needs, we're happy to provide support engagements that fit your needs and build on key adjustments. So please feel free to reach out. We, again, don't feel like any of these are kind of hard-coded in terms of how we would approach the project, but really want to make sure that we're always kind of customizing what processes fit best for your users and stakeholders.